I see the world in red and black ink. That is just how my brain is wired. I am 35 years old, and I work as a forensic accountant in downtown Columbus, Ohio. Most people think my job is boring. They imagine me sitting in a beige cubicle, tapping on a calculator, staring at spreadsheets until my eyes bleed. They are wrong. My job is not about math. My job is about lies. Numbers do not lie, but people do. People lie about their assets, their debts, their profits, and their losses. My job is to look at the chaotic mess of a company's financial life and find the one thread that, when pulled, unravels the entire sweater. I find the hidden offshore accounts. I find the ghost employees. I find the secrets. It is a skill that has served me well in my career, but it has made me a very cynical woman in my personal life. I do not trust easily. I check receipts. I read the fine print. And I never, ever take things at face value. Especially when it comes to the people who share my DNA. It was a Tuesday afternoon in mid-October when the package arrived at my office. The sky outside was a bruised purple, threatening a storm, and I was deep into an audit of a construction firm that had somehow lost $400,000 in miscellaneous supplies. "Delivery for Valerie," the receptionist said, leaning into my office door. She was holding a large, white styrofoam cooler box. It looked heavy. I frowned, taking off my reading glasses. I didn't order anything. It was express shipped. Overnight air. "Someone really loves you," she teased, setting the box down on my desk with a heavy thud. I stared at the box like it was a bomb. I wasn't expecting anything. My birthday was technically today, yes, but I hadn't celebrated a birthday with anyone other than a bottle of Pinot Noir and a takeout pizza in 5 years. I reached for the packing slip attached to the handle. From Richard and Glenda. To Valerie. Contents: perishable. Handle with care. My stomach did a slow, uneasy flip. My father and my stepmother. We were what you would call low contact. I saw them maybe twice a year, usually at Christmas, and usually for less than 2 hours before Glenda made a comment about my weight, my job, or my lack of a husband, and I would leave. I cut the tape with a letter opener. The screech of the packing tape sounded too loud in the quiet office. Inside, nestled in dry ice packs, was a bakery box. It was fancy. The logo was gold foil script, La Pâtisserie. That was a boutique bakery in the short North District. Their cakes cost more than my weekly grocery budget. I lifted the lid. Inside sat a masterpiece. A 6-inch, triple-layer chocolate ganache cake. It was dark, rich, and glossy, topped with hand-shaved chocolate curls and edible gold leaf. It smelled divine, a deep, bitter cocoa scent that usually made my mouth water. But as I looked at it, I didn't feel hungry. I felt a phantom nausea rising in my throat. Flashbacks hit me without permission. I was 7 years old. Glenda had just moved in. She had made meatloaf. Mine tasted sour. When I complained, she told my father I was being an ungrateful brat. I ate it because I was afraid of Richard's disappointment. I spent the next 3 days in the bathroom with severe food poisoning. Glenda had just smiled and said I had a weak constitution. Tanya, her daughter, and my older stepsister, had eaten a different meatloaf. She was fine. I shook my head, trying to clear the memory. There was a card tucked under the ribbon. I opened it. "Valerie, we know things have been strained. We want to start over. This year is a new beginning. Happy 35th birthday. Please enjoy this treat, just for you. Love, Dad and Glenda." "Just for you," I whispered, reading the line again. The handwriting was Glenda's. Loops and swirls that looked pretty but were hard to read. I sat there for 10 minutes, staring at the cake. It was a peace offering. It was expensive. To throw it away would be wasteful, and if there is one thing an accountant hates, it is waste. But I knew, with absolute certainty, that I could not put a single forkful of that cake into my mouth. The psychological block was a 10-foot concrete wall. Then, I thought of Sammy. Sammy was my half-brother. Richard and Glenda's son. He was 12 years old, and he was the only innocent thing to come out of that house. He had messaged me earlier that morning, a secret text sent from the school bathroom, wishing me a happy birthday. He also mentioned he had aced his math test, a B+, which for Sammy, was a miracle. A smile finally touched my lips. Sammy loved chocolate. He would inhale this thing. And Tanya's kids, my nephews Paxton and Knox, were usually over at the house on Tuesdays. Well, I said to the empty room. I guess I am making a delivery. I closed the box, resealed the cooler, and grabbed my car keys. I didn't know it then, but as I walked out of that office building, carrying that white box, I wasn't carrying a birthday gift. I was carrying a weapon. The drive from downtown Columbus to Dublin usually took about 25 minutes, but the impending storm had snarled traffic on Route 315. It gave me too much time to think. Why now? Why the expensive cake? Richard had called me last week asking for a short-term loan of $5,000 because the transmission on his truck had blown. I had said no. I always said no. I knew about Glenda's gambling. I knew about the online slots. Giving them money was like pouring water into a bucket with no bottom. So how did they afford a $100 cake? Maybe they had won a jackpot? That would explain the sudden generosity. A guilt gift bought with winnings. That tracked. I pulled into the driveway of the house I grew up in. It looked tired. The siding needed a power wash, and the gutters were overflowing with dead leaves. It stood in stark contrast to the manicured lawns of the neighbors. It was the house of people who were slowly losing their grip on middle-class respectability. I didn't ring the doorbell. I still had a key, a fact I kept quiet. I let myself in through the side door that led into the kitchen. The house smelled of Glenda's perfume, something floral and cheap that clung to the back of your throat, mixed with the stale odor of cigarettes. Hello? I called out. Silence. I walked into the living room. No Richard. No Glenda. But sitting on the floor, surrounded by Lego blocks, were Sammy and my two nephews. Paxton was 6, and Knox was 4. They looked up at me with wide eyes. Val. Sammy scrambled up. He was gangly for 12, all knees and elbows, wearing a hoodie that was 2 sizes too big. He ran over and gave me an awkward side hug. What are you doing here? I was in the neighborhood, I lied smoothly. Where are the wardens? Mom and Dad went to the store, Sammy said, glancing nervously at the hallway. Tanya is here. She's on the back porch. I looked through the sliding glass door. Tanya was there, back turned to us, phone pressed to her ear, a glass of wine in her other hand. She was pacing aggressively. Probably fighting with her ex-husband again. She didn't see me. Good. I can't stay long, I said, crouching down to eye level with the boys. But I brought supplies. I hefted the cooler onto the coffee table and opened it. The boys gasped as I lifted the bakery box lid. The gold leaf shimmered in the dim living room light. Whoa, Paxton whispered, reaching out a sticky hand before pulling it back. Is that for us? It's my birthday cake, I said. But here is the thing. I am on a strict diet. No sugar, no carbs, no joy. Doctor's orders. Sammy frowned. Really? Really. And it is a tragedy because this is triple chocolate ganache. It is basically pure fudge. I winked at him. I need some brave soldiers to dispose of the evidence for me. Do you think you guys can handle it? Yes. Knox shouted, jumping up and down. But Val, Sammy hesitated, looking at the card. If Mom sent this, won't she be mad if you don't eat it? I felt a twinge of guilt. Sammy was always walking on eggshells, always trying to manage Glenda's moods. It broke my heart. She won't know, I said, grabbing a knife from the kitchen. I am going to tell her I loved it. And technically, I am loving it. I am loving watching you guys eat it. I cut into the cake. The knife slid through the ganache like it was cutting through soft butter. The layers were dense and dark. I put huge slices onto paper plates I found on the counter. All right, dig in. I watched them. Paxton and Knox attacked the cake with their hands, smearing chocolate over their faces immediately. Sammy was more reserved. He took a forkful, put it in his mouth, and closed his eyes. Oh my God, he mumbled, mouth full. This is the best thing I have ever tasted. Good, I said, ruffling his hair. Eat as much as you want. Take the whole box. Hide it in your room if you have to, so Glenda doesn't hoard it. I stayed for another 10 minutes, listening to them giggle and argue over who got the piece with the most gold leaf. I felt a warm glow in my chest. This was better than eating it alone in my apartment. I had turned a suspicious, guilt-laden object into a moment of pure happiness for 3 kids who didn't get enough of it. I have to go before Tanya comes in and asks me for $20, I whispered to Sammy. Thanks, Val, Sammy said. He had chocolate on his chin. Happy birthday. Love you, kid. I slipped out the side door just as I heard the sliding glass door open and Tanya's voice screeching at someone on the phone. I got in my car and drove away, feeling lighter than I had in months. By the time I got back to my apartment in the Arena district, it was dark. The storm had finally broken, and rain was lashing against my floor-to-ceiling windows. I changed into sweatpants, poured myself a large glass of red wine, and stood looking out at the city lights blurring in the rain. I felt safe here. My apartment was sterile, modern, and quiet. It was everything my childhood home was not. I checked my watch. 7:15 p.m. My phone buzzed on the kitchen island. I glanced at the screen. Dad. I took a sip of wine and steeled myself. I let it ring 3 times before answering. I had to play the part of the grateful daughter. Hello? Valerie? Richard's voice was tight. Higher pitched than usual. He sounded breathless, like he had just run up a flight of stairs. Hi, Dad. Thanks for the package. That was unexpected. Did you open it? He asked quickly. Too quickly. Did you try it? It looked beautiful, I said, keeping my voice neutral. Very fancy. Must have cost a fortune. We just wanted to do something nice, he said. I could hear a weird background noise, a rhythmic tapping. Was he tapping his foot? So, how was it? The taste? It was rich, I said. Very intense chocolate. You ate it then? He sounded almost desperate for confirmation. You had a slice? Dad, relax. Yes, I got the cake. But did you eat it, Valerie? Right now? Did you finish it? The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Why was he pushing so hard? Usually, Richard couldn't wait to get off the phone with me. This interrogation was bizarre. Why does it matter if I ate it right this second? I asked, my forensic instincts flaring up. Is there something wrong with it? No. No, of course not, he stammered. Just. Glenda wanted to know. It's perishable. Needs to be eaten fresh. Give me the phone, Richard, I heard Glenda snap in the background. There was a fumbling sound, and then my stepmother's voice pierced my ear. Valerie, she barked. She sounded aggressive, but underneath the anger, I heard something else. Panic? Stop playing games. Did you eat the cake or not? We spent good money on that. I rolled my eyes. There it was. The guilt trip about money. Glenda, it's 7:30 on a Tuesday. I'm tired. Why are you calling me to monitor my calorie intake? Just answer the question, she screamed. It was so loud I had to pull the phone away from my ear. Did you eat the whole thing? I had had enough. I was done with their weird, controlling games. I decided to be petty. I decided to tell them the truth, just to shut them up and show them that their precious gift wasn't sitting on my hips. You want to know? I snapped, setting my wine glass down hard on the counter. No. I didn't eat a single crumb. What? Her voice dropped to a whisper. I didn't eat it, I said, leaning into the phone, enjoying my little rebellion. I drove out to the house this afternoon while you guys were out shopping. I gave the entire box to Sammy and the boys. The silence that followed was absolute. It wasn't just a pause in conversation. It was the sound of air being sucked out of a room. It was heavy, suffocating, and terrifying. You. Glenda's voice was barely audible. It trembled. You did what? I gave it to Sammy, Paxton, and Knox, I repeated, confused by the shift in the atmosphere. They were there with Tanya. They loved it. They devoured nearly half the cake right in front of me. Sammy said it was the best thing he'd ever, and the scream that tore through the phone didn't sound human. It was a guttural, animalistic shriek of pure terror. You stupid bitch. You killed them. What? I froze. My blood ran cold. Glenda, what are you talking about? Call 911, she was shrieking now, her voice breaking into hysterical sobs. Richard. The kids. She fed it to the kids. I heard a crash on the other end, like the phone had been dropped. I heard Richard shouting something in the distance, a wail of despair. Glenda? I shouted. Glenda, answer me. What was in the cake? The line went dead. I stood there in my silent, expensive apartment, the phone still pressed to my ear. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. You killed them. I didn't think. I didn't analyze. I dropped the wine glass. It shattered on the floor, red liquid splashing across the white tiles like blood. I grabbed my keys and ran for the door. I do not remember the elevator ride down to the parking garage. I do not remember starting my car. The first thing I remember clearly is the speedometer of my Audi hitting 90 miles an hour on the slick, rain-soaked pavement of Route 315. The wipers were slapping against the glass, fighting a losing battle against the downpour. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white, aching with the tension. Every time I blinked, I saw Sammy's face. I saw him smiling, chocolate smeared on his chin, saying, "This is the best thing I have ever tasted." You killed them. Glenda's scream was looping in my head like a broken record. Why did she say that? Why was she so sure? If I had told any normal parent that their kid ate too much cake, they would worry about a stomach ache, maybe a sugar crash. They wouldn't scream about death. They wouldn't call 911 instantly. Unless they knew something. Unless they knew exactly what was inside that ganache. I drifted across 2 lanes without signaling, horns blaring around me. I didn't care. I needed to get to Nationwide Children's Hospital. It was the only place the ambulance would take them. I pulled up to the emergency room entrance, mounting the curb with 2 wheels. I left the car running, doors unlocked, and sprinted through the automatic sliding doors. The smell hit me first. It wasn't the smell of illness, it was the smell of chaos. Controlled panic. The air was thick with the scent of antiseptic, wet raincoats, and fear. Sammy! I shouted, ignoring the security guard who stepped toward me. Sammy Morrison. Where is he? Ma'am, you need to calm down, a nurse at the triage desk said, standing up. Are you family? I am his sister. I gasped, my chest heaving. 3 children. Poisoning. They just came in. Her face changed. The annoyance vanished, replaced by a look of pity that terrified me more than the anger. Trauma room 1 and 2, she said softly. They are working on them now. I ran. I burst through the double doors into the trauma bay. The scene before me was a nightmare come to life. Sammy was on the bed to my left. He was stripped to his waist, his pale skin looking almost green under the harsh fluorescent lights. Doctors were swarming him. A tube was being shoved down his throat. Heart rate is 180 and rising, a doctor shouted. Pushing atropine. Get the charcoal ready. On the next bed, little Knox was screaming, a high, thin sound of pure agony. He was vomiting into a plastic basin held by a nurse. The vomit was black. And standing in the corner, huddled together like wet rats, were Richard, Glenda, and Tanya. Glenda looked up as I entered. Her mascara was running down her face in black streaks. Her eyes were wild. When she saw me, she didn't look relieved. She looked trapped. I walked toward the bed, my legs feeling like jelly. I reached out to touch Sammy's foot. It was ice cold. Sammy? I whispered. He convulsed. His whole body arched off the mattress, eyes rolling back in his head. The monitor above him started screaming a steady, high-pitched tone. He is coding, the doctor yelled. Clear. Charging to 200. I watched, frozen, as my father's son died on the table in front of me. And then, with a jolt of electricity that made his small body jump, he came back. The monitor beeped again. A slow, erratic rhythm. We have a pulse, the nurse said, wiping sweat from her forehead. It is weak, but we have a pulse. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding and collapsed into a plastic chair against the wall. I put my head between my knees, trying not to pass out. The smell of the black vomit, activated charcoal mixed with bile, was overwhelming. I wasn't an accountant in that moment. I wasn't a cynic. I was just a terrified sister praying to a God I hadn't spoken to in years. Please let him live. Take me instead. Just let him live. An hour later, the chaos had settled into a grim, beeping silence. The boys had been stabilized, barely. They were moved to the ICU, hooked up to more machines than I could count. We were standing in a private family waiting room. Me, Richard, Glenda, and Tanya. The air in the room was toxic. Tanya was sobbing into a tissue, rocking back and forth. Richard was staring at the floor, wringing his hands until the skin looked raw. Glenda was pacing, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. The door opened, and the lead physician, Dr. Aris, walked in. He looked exhausted. He held a clipboard against his chest. They are stable for now, he said without preamble. But we are not out of the woods. The toxin levels in their blood were massive. Toxin? I asked, standing up. My voice sounded raspy. What kind of toxin? Dr. Aris looked at me, then at my parents. Cardiac glycosides. Specifically, digitalis. It is found in the foxglove plant. It slows the heart rate and causes severe arrhythmia. In the doses we found in their systems, it looks deliberate. An adult might have survived it with severe illness. But for children? This was a lethal dose. Foxglove. A common garden plant. Or a poison you buy on the dark web if you want to stop someone's heart without leaving a trace of arsenic. Digitalis. I repeated, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. Suddenly, Glenda stopped pacing. She turned toward the doctor, her face twisting into a mask of righteous fury. She pointed a shaking finger directly at my face. It was her, she shrieked. She did this. She poisoned them. I blinked, stunned. What? She brought the cake. Glenda yelled, grabbing Dr. Aris's arm. We weren't even home. We came back and found the kids eating a cake she brought over. She fed it to them and left. Tanya looked up, her eyes red and swollen. You. She whispered. Then she lunged at me. You tried to kill my babies. Tanya screamed, clawing at my face. Her nails raked across my cheek, drawing blood. I stumbled back, catching her wrists. Tanya, stop. Are you insane? I didn't make the cake. You brought it. Glenda was shouting now, playing to the audience of nurses gathering in the hallway. She has always been jealous. She hates that we are happy. She brought that poisoned cake to my house to kill my family. I brought the cake you sent me, I yelled back, shoving Tanya away. I looked at Richard. He was sitting in the corner, crying silently, refusing to meet my eyes. Dad, I pleaded. Tell them. Tell them you sent the package to my office. Richard looked up. His lip quivered. He looked at Glenda, who was glaring at him with eyes that promised hellfire. He looked at me. And then, the coward looked back at the floor. I don't know, Val, he mumbled. We didn't send any cake. My jaw dropped. The betrayal hit me harder than Tanya's slap. They were framing me. Right here, right now. They were going to pin their own failed murder plot on the victim who survived it. You are lying, I said, my voice dangerously low. You are lying through your teeth. Security. Dr. Eris called out, stepping between us. 2 burly guards entered the room. Separate them. Now. I am calling the police. Good. Glenda spat, adjusting her blouse. Arrest her. She is a monster. I was escorted out of the room, down the hall to a plastic bench near the vending machines. I sat there, touching the scratch on my cheek. My hand came away with a smear of blood. I looked at the closed door of the waiting room. They were in there, getting their stories straight. They thought they had won. They thought I was just the dumb stepdaughter who crunched numbers. But they forgot one thing. I don't just crunch numbers. I hunt them. And as the shock began to fade, a cold, hard rage began to settle in my chest. It replaced the fear. It replaced the sadness. I wasn't going to cry anymore. I was going to work. Detective Miller was a man who looked like he had seen too much of the ugly side of Columbus. He was wearing a rumpled suit and smelled of stale coffee. He sat across from me in a small interview room at the hospital, his notepad open. So, Ms. Morrison, he said, clicking his pen. Let's go over this again. You claim your parents sent you the cake for your birthday. I don't claim it, I said, my voice steady. The forensic accountant in me had taken the wheel. Emotions were liabilities right now. Facts were assets. It arrived at my office via courier around 2 p.m. The packing slip listed Richard and Glenda Morrison as the senders. And where is this packing slip now? Miller asked. In the trash can in my office downtown, I said. Then I paused. No, the cleaning crew came at 6 p.m. Actually, it might be gone. The janitors empty the bins every evening. Miller frowned. That is unfortunate. And the box? The cake itself? I left it at the house in Dublin, I said. On the coffee table. Miller made a note. We have officers heading to the residence now to secure the scene. But your stepmother claims you brought the cake in a cooler. She says they never ordered anything from La Patisserie. Of course she did. Glenda was thinking fast. If the police went to the house and found the cake box, that was fine. But if they found the shipping box, the one with the FedEx label and the tracking number, that would trace back to who paid for it. And suddenly, a terrifying thought hit me. Glenda and Richard were here. Tanya was here. The house was empty. But Glenda wasn't stupid. Before they rushed the kids to the hospital, what was the first thing she would have done? She would have tried to destroy the evidence. She would have thrown the shipping box away. Maybe she tried to burn it? Maybe she shoved it in the recycling bin? If the police got there and just found a cake box with my fingerprints on it, and no shipping label proving it came from them, it was my word against 3 of them. I needed that shipping label. Am I under arrest, detective? I asked abruptly. Miller looked up, surprised by the shift in my tone. Not at this time. But you are a person of interest. I wouldn't leave town. I'm not going anywhere, I said, standing up. I need to get some air. The smell of charcoal is making me sick. I'll be just outside. Miller eyed me suspiciously but nodded. Don't go far. I walked out of the interview room, keeping my pace slow and steady until I turned the corner. Then, I bolted. I ran to the elevators, bypassing the lobby where the family might see me. I got to the parking garage, my hands shaking as I fumbled for my keys. I checked my watch. 9:15 p.m. The police were heading to the residence. But this was a busy night in Columbus. A suspected poisoning dispatch might take 20 minutes to get a unit out to the suburbs if they were prioritizing the hospital scene. I had a 20-minute head start. I jumped into my Audi and fired the engine. I wasn't going to get air. I was going to break into a crime scene. As I sped out of the garage, my mind started racing through the financial implications. Why would they do this? Why now? The trust fund. My mother, my real mother, had left me a trust fund when she died of cancer when I was 10. $2.5 million. It was locked up tight until I turned 35. Today was my 35th birthday. The money became liquid today. And the terms of the trust stated that if I died without a spouse or children, the entire estate reverted to my next of kin. My father. It wasn't a birthday gift. It was an investment. They spent $100 on a cake to make $2 million. I slammed my hand on the steering wheel. You greedy bastards, I hissed at the windshield. I drove faster. The rain was letting up, but the roads were still slick. I had to get to that house. I had to find that box before the cops did, or before Glenda managed to call a neighbor to go over and torch the place. I was done playing the victim. They wanted a war? They just declared one on the wrong forensic accountant. If you are enjoying the story so far, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Also, drop a comment below telling me which city you are watching from, it really helps the video reach more people. Thank you so much. The house in Dublin was dark when I pulled into the driveway. The rain had stopped, leaving the asphalt slick and black, reflecting the street lamps like a mirror. I cut the headlights half a block away and coasted in, parking behind a dense hedge of overgrown arborvitae. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that felt dangerously loud in the silence of the suburbs. I was breaking and entering. Technically, it was my childhood home, and my name was still on the deed of trust as a residual beneficiary, but in the eyes of the law, I was contaminating a potential crime scene. I didn't care. I needed the box. I slipped out of the car, pulling my hood up. The air was cold and damp. I went to the side door, the one that led into the laundry room. My key slid into the lock with a familiar, gritty scrape. I turned it. Click. I slipped inside and closed the door softly behind me. The house smelled different in the dark. It smelled of secrets. I pulled a small flashlight from my keychain, a habit from my auditing days when I had to inspect dim warehouses, and swept the beam across the kitchen. The mess was still there. The paper plates with half-eaten cake were on the coffee table in the living room. I avoided that room. The police would look there first. I went straight to the kitchen trash can. Glenda was lazy. She was evil, but she was lazy. She wouldn't have driven to a dumpster to dispose of the evidence. She would have buried it. I opened the stainless steel paddle bin. It was full. Empty wine bottles, fast food wrappers, coffee grounds. I pulled a pair of latex gloves from my purse, I always kept a pair for handling dirty receipts, and started digging. Halfway down, buried under a greasy pizza box, I found it. The shipping box. It was a standard white cardboard box, but the FedEx label was clearly visible. I carefully pulled it out, brushing off a stray piece of lettuce. I shone my light on the label. Sender, R.N.G. Morrison. 1402 Maple Drive, Dublin, Ohio. Payment method, Visa ending in 4491. There it was. proof they sent it. But that wasn't enough. I needed to know what they sent. I opened the flaps of the box. Inside, crumpled at the bottom, was the packing slip Glenda thought she had thrown away. I smoothed it out on the granite countertop. Item: 6-inch dark chocolate ganache cake. Special instructions: do not include invoice in box. Gift. I took photos of everything with my phone. High resolution, flash off. Then I found something else in the bottom of the bin. A small, crushed plastic vial. It looked like a travel-sized shampoo bottle, but the label had been peeled off. I sniffed it. No scent. But there was a tiny residue of greenish-brown liquid at the rim. Foxglove extract? Or maybe a concentrated digitalis tincture bought from some sketchy herbalist? I bagged the vial in a Ziploc bag from the pantry. I was about to leave when I saw the mail pile on the counter. It was a chaotic stack of envelopes, mostly unopened. The forensic accountant in me couldn't resist. I flipped through them. Final notice. Past due. Collection agency. And then, the big one. A letter from the bank, dated 3 days ago. Notice of default and intent to foreclose. They weren't just struggling. They were drowning. They had 30 days to come up with $40,000 in arrears, or the house was gone. I looked around the dark kitchen. This wasn't a home anymore. It was a sinking ship. And they had decided that throwing me overboard was the only way to keep it afloat. Headlights swept across the front window. Blue lights flashed silently. The police were here. I shoved the Ziploc bag and the shipping label into my purse. I grabbed the entire shipping box, flattened it with my foot, and shoved it under my coat. I bolted out the back sliding door just as a heavy fist pounded on the front door. I sprinted through the wet backyard, jumped the low fence into the neighbor's yard, and circled back to my car. I was shaking, wet, and terrified. But I had the evidence. I didn't drive back to the hospital immediately. I drove to a 24-hour diner near the highway, ordered a black coffee, and opened my laptop. I needed to connect the dots before I handed anything over to Detective Miller. I had the how, the cake, the shipping label. I had the what, the vial. Now I needed the why in concrete numbers. I logged into a credit search database. It was a tool I used for work. It wasn't exactly public access, but I had a license. I ran a search on Richard Morrison. The screen filled with red flags. His credit score was in the low 400s. He had 5 maxed-out credit cards. But the most interesting part was the joint account with Glenda. I pulled up the transaction history. It was a horror show. Jackpot Joy Online Casino, $500. Jackpot Joy Online Casino, $200. CryptoBet Wallet, $1,000. Page after page. In the last 6 months alone, Glenda had gambled away nearly $60,000. And that was just on the cards I could see. Then I saw a transaction that made my breath hitch. October 12, Dark Web Herbal Curative, offshore transaction $350. October 12. 5 days ago. That was when she bought the poison. I moved to Richard's email. I knew his password. It was password 123. He had never changed it since I set up the account for him 10 years ago. I logged in. The inbox was full of spam and debt collection warnings. I went to the trash folder. There it was. A confirmation email from La Patisserie. And right below it, a deleted Google search history alert. Richard had synced his iPad to his email account, and he didn't know how to turn off the activity report feature. I opened the report for October 10th. Search, symptoms of heart attack in women 30s. Search, how long does digitalis stay in blood? Search, Valerie Morrison Trust Fund beneficiary terms. I stared at the screen, the neon light of the diner buzzing overhead. It was so cold. So calculated. They had researched my death like they were researching a vacation. Beneficiary terms, I whispered. I knew the terms of my mother's trust by heart. Upon the death of the primary beneficiary, me, the principal sum shall revert to the legal guardian or next of kin, Richard. $2.5 million. They were going to kill me, cry at my funeral, pay off the house, and then gamble the rest away. My life was just a line item in their debt consolidation plan. I saved everything to a secure cloud drive. I forwarded the file to my personal attorney, Mr. Henderson, with the subject line, "In case of death, open immediately." Then I closed the laptop. My hands were steady now. The fear was gone. I felt a strange, icy calm. This is what I did best. I took chaos and turned it into a cage. I paid for my coffee and walked back to the car. I had one more stop to make before I dropped the hammer. I needed to see Sammy. The ICU was quiet when I returned. It was 3 a.m. The nurses recognized me and nodded as I walked past the station. They looked tired. I slipped into Sammy's room. He was awake. He looked so small in the hospital bed, wires and tubes creating a web around him. His skin was pale, almost translucent, but his eyes were open, staring at the ceiling. "Hey, buddy," I whispered, pulling a chair close to the bed. He turned his head slowly. When he saw me, his eyes filled with tears. "Val," he croaked. His voice was raw from the intubation tube. "I'm sorry." "Shoo," I said, taking his hand. It was warm now. "Don't apologize. You didn't do anything wrong." "I did," he cried, a tear sliding into his ear. "I was greedy. I ate the cake." "Sammy, listen to me," I said, leaning in close. "Why did you think you couldn't eat the cake? Why did you apologize for that?" He swallowed hard. "Because Mom. Glenda, she told me." I pulled out my phone and hit the voice memo app. The red record button pulsed silently. "What did she tell you, Sammy?" "It's important." He took a shaky breath. "She called me yesterday after school. She said a package was coming for you. She said it was medicine." "Medicine?" "Yeah. She said you were sick. That you had the sadness sickness again." He looked at me with wide, innocent eyes. "She said the bakery put special medicine in the cake to make you happy, but it was too strong for kids. She said if I ate it, I would get sick. She made me promise on my life, that I wouldn't open the box." My stomach twisted. She had weaponized his obedience. She knew Sammy was a good kid who followed rules. She counted on him leaving the box alone so I would eat it. "But you opened it," I said softly. "I didn't mean to," he sobbed. "But you brought it over, and you said it was okay. And you didn't look sad. You looked happy. So I thought. I thought maybe she was lying. Or maybe the medicine was just vitamins." "She was lying, Sammy," I said, squeezing his hand tight. "She was lying about everything. I'm not sick." "Why would she do that?" he asked, his voice breaking. "Why would she put bad medicine in your birthday cake?" I couldn't tell him the truth. I couldn't tell a 12-year-old boy that his mother tried to murder his sister for slot machine money. "Because she is sick, Sammy. In her head." I smoothed his hair back. "But you are safe now. I promise. I am going to take care of you." "Is Knox okay?" he asked. "Knox is tough. He's going to make it." Sammy closed his eyes, exhaustion pulling him under. "Don't leave, Val. Please." "I'm not going anywhere," I said. I sat there until his breathing evened out into sleep. Then, I stopped the recording. I had the confession. I had the motive. I had the physical evidence. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the hospital parking lot. Down below, I saw a police cruiser pulling up to the entrance. 2 officers got out. And behind them, handcuffed and looking disheveled, was Richard. They must have found something at the house after all. Or maybe Miller had just decided that Richard's sweating and stuttering was enough for probable cause. It was time to end this. I texted Mr. Henderson, "Meet me at the precinct at 8 a.m. I'm bringing the entire case file. We are going for the throat." Then I walked out of the room to meet Detective Miller. I didn't look like a victim anymore. I looked like a prosecutor. Dawn broke over Columbus in a wash of gray light. It was 8 a.m., and the coffee in my hand had gone cold hours ago. I was standing in the corridor of the police precinct, watching through the one-way glass of interrogation room B. Richard was in there. He had been crying for 4 hours straight. He hadn't confessed yet, but he was leaking anxiety like a broken pipe. "He's the weak link," Mr. Henderson said, standing beside me. My lawyer was a shark in a three-piece suit, gray hair, sharp eyes, and a billable rate that would make a normal person faint. To me, he was worth every penny. "He is," I agreed. "But Glenda is the mastermind. Richard just drove the getaway car. If we don't pin this on her explicitly, she'll plead down to reckless endangerment. She'll claim it was a prank gone wrong. She'll say she didn't know the dose was lethal." "We have the search history," Henderson noted. "That proves premeditation." "We have Richard's search history," I corrected. "Glenda is smart enough to use his device. She'll claim he did it all and she was just a dutiful wife. We need her to say it. We need her to admit she bought the poison." Detective Miller walked out of the interrogation room, looking frustrated. "He's clamming up. Says he wants a lawyer. We can hold him for 24 hours, but unless he talks, we're building a puzzle with missing pieces." "Where is Glenda?" I asked. "She's in the waiting area of the hospital still," Miller said. "Refusing to leave until she sees the kids. She's making a scene. Calling the news stations, claiming the hospital is kidnapping her grandchildren." I felt a cold smile tug at the corner of my mouth. She thinks she's controlling the narrative. That's her weakness. She can't resist the spotlight. I turned to Henderson. "I'm going back to the hospital." "Valerie, no," Henderson warned. "Let the police handle it." "The police can't get her to talk," I said, pulling my coat tighter. "But I can. She hates me. And hate makes people sloppy." I looked at Miller. "Meet me at the hospital in 20 minutes. Have your guys ready. But don't approach her until I give the signal. I'm going to give you the show you need." I drove back to Nationwide Children's. I didn't fix my hair. I didn't touch up my makeup. I let the exhaustion, the fear, and the stress show on my face. I needed to look defeated. I needed to look like the broken little girl she always wanted me to be. I walked into the family waiting area. It was empty except for Glenda and Tanya. Tanya was sleeping fitfully on 2 pushed-together chairs. Glenda was sitting upright, scrolling furiously on her phone. When she saw me, her lip curled. "You," she spat. "Have you come to finish the job?" I didn't fight back. I slumped my shoulders and walked over to the vending machine, leaning against it like I could barely stand. "I'm done, Glenda," I said softly. "I can't do this anymore. The police, they're asking too many questions. I don't want to go to jail." Glenda paused. Her eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" I took a deep breath, executing the lie perfectly. "I told them I bought the cake. I told them it was an accident. I'm going to take the fall." The silence in the room was thick. Tanya stirred, rubbing her eyes, looking between us. Glenda stood up slowly. She looked at me like a predator assessing a wounded gazelle. You told them you did it?" "Yes," I lied, keeping my eyes on the floor. "I can't let Richard go to prison. He's old. He won't survive it. And you have the boys to think of." I reached into my purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was an old grocery list, but from a distance, it looked like a legal document. "I just wanted to stop," I whispered, my voice trembling. I'm going to sign the trust fund over to Dad. Today. All 2.5 million. Just, please tell me the boys are going to be okay. Tell me the poison it wasn't meant to hurt them this bad, right? Glenda walked over to me. The greed in her eyes was so intense it was almost glowing. She saw the document in my hand. She saw the surrender. Her narcissism took over. She couldn't help but gloat. You stupid girl, she sneered, snatching the paper from my hand. Of course it wasn't meant for them. It was meant for you. My heart hammered, but I kept my face crumbled. Why? Why did you hate me that much? Hate? Glenda laughed, a harsh, barking sound. It wasn't about hate, Valerie. It was about math. You sit on that pile of money, living in your fancy condo, judging us. We were drowning. One dose. That's all it would have taken. A heart attack. A tragedy. And then we could finally live the life we deserved. Tanya sat up, fully awake now. Mom, stop, she hissed. Shut up, Tanya, Glenda snapped. She stepped closer to me, invading my space. I bought the extract myself. Pure foxglove. 50 milligrams. It was supposed to be quick. You eat the cake, you go to sleep, you don't wake up. But no. You had to be the saint. You had to give it to my grandkids. She poked a finger into my chest. This is your fault. If you weren't such a suspicious, ungrateful bitch, you would have eaten it, and my babies would be fine. You forced my hand. So you admit it? I asked, looking up. I dropped the act. My voice went from trembling to ice cold in a split second. You bought the poison. You planned it for months. You tried to murder me for an insurance payout. Glenda blinked. The shift in my demeanor confused her. She looked at the paper in her hand, the grocery list. She frowned. What is this? That, I said, straightening my spine, is a distraction. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. The screen was glowing. And this, I said, is a live stream. I turned the phone around. It wasn't just recording. I was on a video call. Did you get all that, Detective? From the speakerphone, Detective Miller's voice boomed, loud and clear. We got it all, Ms. Morrison. Don't move. Glenda's face went white. The color drained out of her so fast she looked like a corpse. She dropped the paper. She looked at the door. No, she whispered. It's over, Glenda, I said, stepping back. You gambled. You lost. The double doors of the waiting room burst open. Detective Miller led the charge, followed by 4 uniformed officers. Glenda Morrison, Miller barked, his hand on his holster. Hands behind your back. You are under arrest for attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and child endangerment. Glenda didn't go quietly. As the officer grabbed her wrist, she screamed. She lunged at me, her fingers crooked into claws. You tricked me, she shrieked, spit flying from her mouth. I'll kill you. I'll kill you myself. The officer slammed her against the vending machine. The sound of metal hitting metal rang through the room. They cuffed her, dragging her kicking and screaming toward the door. Tanya Rivera, Miller said, turning to my stepsister. Stand up. Tanya shrank back against the wall, sobbing. I didn't know. I swear. I just thought. I thought they were just going to make her sick. I didn't know it was poison. You knew about the plan, Tanya, I said, watching her with zero sympathy. You knew they were sending something to hurt me. And you let your kids be in the line of fire. You are under arrest for conspiracy and child endangerment, Miller said, cuffing her. I watched them being marched out. The lobby was full of people now, nurses, patients, visitors, all staring at the spectacle. Glenda was still screaming obscenities. Tanya was weeping. When the doors finally closed behind them, the silence that followed was heavy. Mr. Henderson walked up beside me. He handed me a cup of fresh coffee. "That was risky," he said. "But effective. Is it enough?" I asked, my hands finally starting to shake as the adrenaline crashed. "With the recording, the financial records you pulled, and Sammy's testimony?" Henderson smiled grimly. "They're never seeing the outside of a cell again." I sat down in the chair Glenda had just vacated. I felt hollow. I had won. I had taken down the people who were supposed to love me. But it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like an amputation. Painful, bloody, but necessary for survival. The next 72 hours were a blur of legal paperwork and sterile courtrooms. With both parents and the only other adult relative, Tanya, in custody, Sammy and the nephews were technically wards of the state. CPS, Child Protective Services, wanted to place them in emergency foster care. Over my dead body, I told the caseworker, a frazzled woman named Mrs. Gable. "Ms. Morrison," she sighed, adjusting her glasses. "You are single, you work 60 hours a week, and you have no experience with children. This is a trauma case. Sammy needs stability." "Stability?" I slammed a thick binder onto her desk. "I am the only stability he has ever known. I have a paid-off condo. I have a trust fund of $2 million that just vested. I can hire tutors, therapists, nannies, whatever he needs. You put him in foster care with strangers after his parents just tried to kill him, and you will break him." I looked her dead in the eye. "And I will sue this department into the ground if you try." Mrs. Gable looked at the binder. It contained my financials, my background check, and a letter from Sammy's doctor stating that separating him from his sister would be psychologically catastrophic. "We have a hearing at 2 p.m., she said quietly. "If the judge signs off, he's yours." The hearing was short. The judge, a stern woman with gray hair, looked at the police report. She looked at the photos of the cake. She looked at Glenda's confession transcript. She looked sickened. "Emergency temporary guardianship of Samuel Morrison is awarded to Valerie Morrison," she ruled, banging the gavel. "The nephews, Paxton and Knox, will be released to their biological father, Mr. Mark Rivera." I exhaled, feeling the weight of the world lift off my shoulders. Mark was a good guy, he had just been pushed out by Glenda's craziness. The boys would be safe with him. But Sammy was mine. I drove to the hospital to pick him up. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, wearing oversized clothes I had bought from Target on the way over. He had a small backpack with his school books, the only things we could salvage from the house before the police sealed it. "Hey," I said, standing in the doorway. Are they in jail?" Sammy asked, looking at his sneakers. "Yes," I said. "For a long time." He nodded. He didn't cry. He looked older than 12. "Where do I go?" he asked. "Foster home?" "Nope," I said, jingling my keys. "You're coming to the Arena District. I hope you like city views, because my guest room has a killer one." He looked up, eyes wide. "Really?" "Really. Pack your stuff, kid. We're going home." Bringing a traumatized 12-year-old into a bachelorette pad was an adjustment. My apartment, once a pristine sanctuary of white leather and glass, was now filled with Lego sets, video game controllers, and the constant sound of the TV. But the hardest part wasn't the clutter. It was the food. For the first month, Sammy wouldn't eat anything he didn't see prepared. If I ordered pizza, he wouldn't touch it until I ate a slice first and waited 20 minutes. If I bought milk, he checked the seal 3 times. The trauma of the cake ran deep. One Tuesday evening, I came home early to find him staring at the pantry, looking hungry but terrified. "Sammy," I said, putting my bag down. "We need to fix this." "I'm not hungry," he lied. His stomach growled. "Get your shoes on," I said. "We're going to the grocery store." We went to Whole Foods. I made him pick out every single ingredient. Flour, eggs, sugar, cocoa powder. What are we making? He asked nervously. We are making a cake, I said. He flinched. I don't want cake. We are making our cake, I corrected. You are going to measure everything. You are going to mix it. You are going to watch it bake. You will know exactly what is in it. It took 3 hours. We made a mess. Flour got everywhere. But when that chocolate cake came out of the oven, lopsided and smelling of warm sugar, Sammy stared at it like it was a bomb that he had successfully defused. I cut a slice. I took a bite. It's good. Needs more salt. But it's safe. Sammy took a fork. His hand shook. He lifted a tiny piece to his mouth. He chewed. He swallowed. And then, he smiled. It was a small, fragile thing, but it was there. It's safe, he whispered. That night, we sat on the balcony, eating cake and watching the city lights. Val, he asked. Yeah? Why did you save me? I looked at him. I saw the boy who used to sneak me candy when Glenda grounded me without dinner. I saw the only person in that house who never looked at me with envy. Because you're my brother, Sammy. And because you were the only one worth saving. The trial happened 11 months later. It was the media event of the year in Columbus. The Poison Cake family, the headline screamed. I sat in the front row every day, wearing my sharpest suits, looking like the armor-clad warrior I had become. Sammy stayed home with a tutor. I wouldn't let him see them. The prosecutor was brilliant. He laid out the timeline, the gambling debts, the foreclosure notices, the dark web purchases, the search history. But the damning evidence was the video. When they played the recording of Glenda in the hospital waiting room, her face twisted in hate, admitting she bought the foxglove, screaming that it was meant for me, the jury gasped. Glenda sat at the defense table, looking small and gray in her prison jumpsuit. She refused to look at the screen. Richard just wept. He had taken a plea deal to testify against her, but he still got 15 years. Tanya got 8 years. She cried through the whole sentencing, begging the judge to think of her kids. The judge, unmoved, told her she should have thought of them when she let them eat poison. But Glenda got the hammer. Mrs. Morrison, the judge said, peering over his glasses. In my 30 years on the bench, I have rarely seen such cold-blooded calculation. You didn't just try to kill your stepdaughter. You weaponized your own son's innocence to do it. You are a danger to society. 25 years, the judge declared. No possibility of parole for 20. I watched the bailiffs handcuff her. For a second, she looked back at the gallery. She locked eyes with me. I expected anger. I expected hate. But all I saw was emptiness. She was a hollow shell of a woman who had consumed herself with greed. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I just stood up, smoothed my skirt, and walked out of the courtroom. The air outside tasted like rain and freedom. 3 years later. I walked into my apartment, kicking off my heels. The smell of roasted chicken filled the air. Sammy. I'm home. A 15-year-old giant walked out of the kitchen. Sammy had hit a growth spurt. He was taller than me now, voice deepening, acne flaring up. He was wearing an Ohio State t-shirt. Hey, Val, he grinned. You're late. The potatoes are getting cold. I was closing the Johnson file, I said, dropping my keys. Forensic accounting waits for no one. I looked around. The apartment was still messy, but it was a happy mess. There were college brochures on the coffee table. He was looking at engineering programs. Happy birthday, he said, pulling a box from behind his back. I froze for a split second. The reflex was still there, deep in my lizard brain. A box on my birthday. But then I looked at the box. It was a shoebox, wrapped in comic book pages. I took it. It was light. Open it, he urged. Inside was a framed photo. It was a picture of us from last summer, hiking in Hocking Hills. We were both laughing, sweaty, and happy. And tucked into the corner of the frame was a copy of his report card. Straight as. I didn't get you a cake, he said, scratching his neck awkwardly. I figured, you know. We made steaks instead. I looked at the photo, then at him. My chest swelled with something that felt like pride and peace mixed together. It's perfect, I said. Better than cake. We sat down to dinner. No poison. No secrets. Just two survivors sharing a meal. I realized then that Glenda was wrong. She thought family was about blood and obligation. She thought she could own people. But family isn't who you're stuck with. Family is who you choose. And looking at Sammy, laughing as he told me about his robotics club, I knew I had made the right choice. I had traded a toxic legacy for a real future. The money from the trust fund was sitting in an investment account now. It was growing. Not for Richard. Not for Glenda. But for Sammy's college. For his first house. For the life they tried to steal from us. I raised my glass of water. To us, kid. Sammy clinked his glass against mine. To us. So, looking back at the wreckage of my family, tell me, am I wrong for refusing to forgive them? I haven't visited them once. My aunt sent me a letter saying I'm cruel for letting my father rot alone in a cell and that family is everything. But I look at Sammy, happy and safe, and I think I defined family just fine. Am I wrong? Or did they get exactly what they ordered? Thanks for listening to my story. If you enjoyed watching Justice Served Cold, please hit that like button and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow. Stay safe out there, check your mail carefully, and never eat the cake if it feels wrong.